Hi everyone, and welcome to today's video. Today I'm going to share with you some of my do's and don'ts in makeup. So on the left side you're going to see everything that I used to do or that I once did that I do not do for a reason. And on this side I'm going to show you how I do things current day so that you can see the difference between the way that I used to do it, which I don't find so flattering for me anymore, and the way that I do things now, which is much more flattering in my opinion. Now, before we get started, a quick disclaimer. If you're still doing the things that I used to do that I no longer like doing, like anything on my left side, that's okay. Keep doing what you're doing. Makeup does not really, like, it has rules, but it doesn't. You know what I mean? It's very expressive. It's a way of like just feeling pretty or expressing your artistic abilities, or just, you know, it's art. It washes off. No one cares at the end of the day. So if you're still doing these things, or if you like doing them, then just keep doing them. Who am I? I'm just some lady on the internet with a channel on YouTube, honestly. So let's get started. Now for the brows, long gone are the days, at least for me, when I used to use pomade, okay? The Anastasia Beverly Hills pomade. I loved that stuff, okay? No one could convince me not to wear it. I used to always start my brows along the bottom. See if I can still remember how to do this. And I'd always take my flat defining brush, who remembers, and I would just drag this along the bottom to clean up the mess. Like that. Very defined, okay? I do things a little bit differently now. As you guys know, I've been in love with this NYX, what is this? I always forget the name. The Lift and Snatch Brow Tint Pen in the shade Espresso. We're just gonna use this along the areas that are sparse throughout the brow. Instead of using it along the entire brow and making it very, very dark, I'm simply going to fill in the blanks, if you will. Now, just like I used to do, I do go back and I just blend everything in so that everything just looks a lot softer. Personally, I just like a softer brow now. I just want my brows to just appear a little bit fuller, but not as carved, not as deep. You get the point. Now I am going to skip the eyes for now, but if you guys do want like an in-depth how I blend now versus how I used to blend, just like focused or concentrated just around the eye area, let me know and I will film that next. So I'm going to speed through the eyes and then I'll come back for the next one. So I continue to do things as I used to do them over here, which I'm just going to break it down really quickly. But like I said, if you guys want a more in-depth how to blend kind of a video, then definitely let me know. But over here, I used to just apply too much and I didn't blend enough. So that's what's going on over here. And of course, for the mascara, you can clearly see the difference. Fuller, thicker, longer, not as full, not as thick, not as long. Next, color correcting. I didn't always do it. And when I did do it, it was not the right shade. And so it did still look pretty bad underneath the eyes. I've since then learned that you have to find the right neutralizing shade. When I first started my YouTube channel and I found the Becca Under Eye Brightening Corrector, that alone was a game changer for me because it did help brighten the under eye area. However, it was the wrong shade. And you can't blame me for that, okay? You can kind of blame me for that, but you can't really blame me for that. For one, there weren't very many color correcting options, and for two, that was the only shade they had at the time. So they only had the light shade. They didn't have that deeper shade that came after. So that's one thing that I'm gonna do over on this side, but that I am not going to do over on this side. So we're gonna be color correcting the right side the way that I do now. I'm only color correcting the area that needs it, which is just right here. I don't really need it out here. I don't need it any further down, just right here. All right, let's take care of foundation really quick. All right, so let's go back to mistake number 2, which is the color correcting and the concealing process. We've already color corrected, now we just have to conceal. Over here, we didn't really color correct, and I applied a little bit of foundation underneath the eyes, which I don't like to do anymore because it's more product underneath the eyes, which means that there may be more settling in between fine lines, there may be more moving around of products that you place on top. So let's go ahead and do the right side, which is what I do now. Do use a concealer that is closest to your foundation shade. Always. especially if you have dark circles. If you don't have dark circles, or if you have very minimal like darkness underneath the eyes, then you can, you know, highlight or use like the shade or two lighter to highlight the under eye area. But for me, personally, I've always felt that I get better coverage when I apply a concealer that's closest to my foundation shade. So I'm just going to concentrate the concealer right here, which is where I need it. Now for blending, since I do have such a small amount of concealer underneath the eyes, I no longer use a beauty blender or a beauty sponge. I find that it absorbs quite a bit of the product and I just end up having to use more. Now I just use a brush, whether it be an eyeshadow brush or a concealer brush, just something that's soft, somewhat dense, and just small enough to be more precise and just kind of spread the product around where you need it, rather than apply too much and then, you know, having to blend out a ton of concealer underneath the eyes, which I did do. I'm going to show you guys. I did used to do that. So just taking this blending brush and spreading the product around, like I said, where I need it, which is just right here along the inner corner. All right, so now that that side is done, let's go over to the left and I'll show you what I used to do. Of course, you guys remember the triangle, right? The infamous upside down triangle. I used to do that. I used to do that all the time. A lot of the time, I would wear a concealer that was not close to my foundation shade. It was just a little bit too light. So we're gonna apply it the way that we used to, which was a very flattering upside down triangle. Okay, and this was done so that we could highlight the under eye area so that it would look more plump and just kind of like bring it forward, which of course makes sense if you're trying to highlight. I was just trying to conceal. I don't know what I was doing. So I'm going to take my damp beauty blender, and this is how I used to blend out my concealer. It honestly would take forever. It would take a really, really long time because I did apply so much underneath the eyes. All right, so there we go. Now we are nice and highlighted, but you can clearly see the darkness and it now looks great. The next thing that I used to do that I no longer do is set the under eye area pretty heavy. Now for this, I'm going to take my Trip and Smooth setting powder from Oma Beauty. I really love this stuff. It's been my go-to since I received it, since I got it. It's a really good setting powder for the under eye area, but just like with any powder, you can overdo it. You know, it doesn't matter if it's like the best powder in the world, you can overdo it. And I used to overdo it. And I used to grab it with my beauty blender. And then I would just apply it onto the under eye area. It actually made the concealer look a lot better because it does have a little bit of pigment. The shade Light looks like that. And when you apply it on top of a concealer and it's not set, like if it's still wet, it is going to deepen the shade a little bit. And it's such a good setting powder that it actually doesn't look as bad over here. Now, the way that I set my concealer now is very, very minimally. And sometimes I don't even really set it, honestly. So I'm taking the same powder. I dip my brush in it, but I get rid of most of it. And then I just slightly pat this underneath the eye. Next, for the lash line, I no longer wear a very deep eyeliner underneath the lash. I usually try to stick with something that's just a little bit brighter. It's going to add a little bit of something, a little extra something to the eye look. And then I'll go in with like an eyeshadow, or like I'll use the same eyeshadows that I used on the lid underneath the eyes just to really bring it all together. Before, I used to use very dark eyeliners underneath the eye. And although that would look great and very like smoked out, sometimes it was just a little too much, you know, it was a little too much. So I'm gonna take a lighter shade underneath the right side. And this I'm gonna drag along the waterline. And after doing that along the waterline, I'll just go back in to the same palette that I used on the lid, and I'll blend some of the eyeshadows onto the lower lash line. Just overall, I'm very, very light-handed along the edges, where I feel like before I just applied a ton of pressure thinking that that was going to blend out my eyeshadows better, but it didn't. So just making sure that if I am going to add something to the lower lash line, that I'm very, very light-handed with it. and that I use something that's similar to what I used on the lid so that the look looks complete rather than two different looks on the top and on the bottom, like I'm gonna do over here. So for this side, I'm just using a black liner, applying it onto the entire waterline. And before, I didn't use like a small blending brush underneath the eyes. I would use my pencil brush, which is a little bit harsher. And then I would always grab the deeper shades first, which I still do, but I don't mix them. I usually would add them one at a time. And sometimes that can overwhelm the under eye area. It could overwhelm the lower lash line really quickly. And before, instead of patting it onto the lower lash line, I would just kind of drag it back and forth. And not only is this super uncomfortable, but it just looks too harsh. You see what I mean? And then I would try to go back in with like lighter shades to blend it out, but then I would drag it too far down because I already had a lot going on underneath the eye. Next, the contour bronzer placement, okay? This I had such a hard time with. For the longest time, okay? When I first started experimenting with the contouring and bronzing process, yeah, it looked like I got punched in the face. So this is how I used to do it. So I used to grab a contour shade and I would just kind of apply it like here. And I would blend out like, you know, try to blend it out as much as I could. Just kind of where I thought like the hollow of my cheek was. I mean, it is right here. And that is where you want it, but you don't want to bring it in too far in. Because with a contour shade, it has like that slight grayness to it. And that is what gives the illusion of shadows. And that's what you're trying to achieve when it comes to contouring. You're just trying to achieve that like chiseled cheek look, just slightly, okay? I would go a little crazy with it. And as you can see, there's the grayness in the powder for a reason, right? It's not a bronzer. So I would kind of apply it all over the place. And then I would follow that up with the bronzer, which I would kind of place up here. And I would also do bronzer along the forehead. Why, you might ask? I don't know, because everybody on YouTube was doing it. All right, so there's that. Doesn't look too bad, right? It looks fine. But if you see this in person, especially if you see this in person, it just looks like this grayish brown that just comes all the way out to here and just, it's not placed in the correct area. So I always use a much smaller brush now. I really like these types of brushes. Angled brushes are really, really good as well. Just something that's going to allow you to be just a little bit more precise, but also blend at the same time. So I'm gonna take Hollow again, but a very, very, very small amount. You don't need a lot at all because you're trying to create just like a subtle shadow. And I'm going to start off by placing it here right above where I feel like my hollow is. So for me, the hollow of my cheek is right here. I'm placing it right above that and just blending it out very, very, very lightly. And just keeping it right here. Not dragging it in because you don't need that. You're just trying to create that illusion right here. See that? And then I'm going to take an angled brush and I'm going to dip it into my bronzing shade. And this, I am going to apply it right on top, but a little bit like a little further up. And this is going to give me like that lifted look. I'm blending this into my contour shade, but I'm also bringing it up a little bit, like toward the temple area. It's going to give me that nice sun-kissed, lifted look. And I'll bring it up to the temple, but I will never bring it up to the forehead. You don't want to do that if you have a small forehead. You just don't, because you don't need it. That creates the illusion of like a smaller forehead when you have a bigger forehead. If you contour or you bronze kind of like along the perimeter of the face, along, you know, the hairline, that's gonna make it look like your forehead's a little bit smaller. But for me, like I can barely fit 3 fingers on my forehead, okay? So like I don't need that. I really don't. And we wanna do the same thing with blush. I used to bring the blush all the way up to the apples of the cheek, but that for me, I don't like it for my face shape anymore. It just makes makes my face look a little bit more round than what I would like. And so instead of bringing it all the way up to the apples of the cheek, I just keep it back here. And again, I'm just doing a very minimal amount. You see that? Whereas before I would bring it up to the apples of the cheek, and then I would pull it back. And you see that it just doesn't look as flattering. Not on my face shape, or at least I don't think so. And the last thing, highlighter. You don't want to wear something that's not intended for your skin tone, unless you really are going for that like very obvious highlighter look, right? Like let's say you are doing a very, I don't know, like artistic look that calls for a highlighter that's like an icy white or like an icy blue or like a lilac shade. I've seen those look beautiful. But if you're just a regular person and you're like, I just want to put a little bit of highlighter on my face, you don't want to use something that's too light or too deep. It's not gonna look right. And I'll show you here. So this one is, what is this shade? It's called Moonbeam, and it's from Sigma Beauty. It's a beautiful, beautiful shade, but it's too light for me. See that? It's just too light. It calls out all of the texture that I have all over that spot on my face, and it's not a good look. Personally, what I like to stick with is, like I said, something that's closest to my complexion or something that's very, very, very subtle. For me, this has been my go-to highlighter ever since I purchased it. This has been like the best thing. This is from Essence. It's their, what is this? The Pure Nude Highlighter in the shade Be My Highlight. So I'll just take some of this and I will just sweep it over the high point of the cheek. And this is gonna give me like that very subtle dewiness without overdoing it at all. And I'm even gonna add it here along the brow bone. Like I said, it's so subtle and it's so soft. It looks really good. So now that I'm finished with both sides, let me bring you in for a closer look. So this is the left side, the way that I once did makeup. And this is the right side. This is the way that I do it now. And I know that sometimes makeup tends to look really good on camera because of like the studio lighting, but this is what it would look like up close and personal if you were to run into me under natural lighting. So here I am up close. This is what the left side looks like. And of course, this is what the right side looks like. So that completes today's video. Thank you all so much for watching. I truly hope that you guys enjoyed today's video and that you found it helpful. Let me know down in the comment section some of your do's and don'ts, and let me know whether or not you'd like to see a part 2 of this video, because I actually had a lot more, but I cut it back because I didn't want this video to be super duper long. Anyway, let me know if you want to see a part 2. Let me know if you guys want to see an eyeshadow like blending video, because I do want to do one of those, but I don't really know if anybody really wants to see it. So make sure you let me know down below. And yeah, don't forget to subscribe so that you don't miss out on future videos. Also, don't forget to follow me over on Instagram, where I absolutely love to interact with you guys. As always, take care, and I will see you all in my next video. Mwah! Bye.